started. We're doing the question on the screen at the moment. So give it a try, and then we're gonna go through the answers together very quickly. Yeah. I'm going to give you guys 2 more minutes, and then we're going to get started on the questions. Our beautiful Teofato's already done. We're going to wait for everybody else. Thank you, Teofato. Thank you, Tristan.
I
Very
love
nice.
it, Noma. Oh.
Nomakosi's emoji is just on fire. I love it. 1 more minute. Gelani's definitely in the rugby spirit. We're enjoying that. That's good. All right, peeps, let's have a look at some of these questions. Okay, so first thing I always say when we have questions like these, even if they don't give you much information, it's good for you to look at the question that they've given you. In this case, we know we're working with functions. So we're going to look at the function before we even look at the questions and ask ourselves what we know about this particular function and what it is that it's telling us. All right, so I know from just looking at this that this particular hyperbola, I almost called it a parabola, it's not, it's a hyperbola. This hyperbola over here is negative. So just before I even look at it, I already know that it's going to sit in quadrants 2 and 3, on 2 and 4. Ooh, okay, yes, in quadrants 2 and 4. And we're going to have 2 asymptotes in this case and not just 1. Okay, so the first question that we get here is write down the equations of the asymptotes. Now remember, these are equations. So you can't just say the asymptote is 3 and 2. That is unacceptable. They want you to write it as an equation. There needs to be an equal sign in each of those answers. So we must have that x is equal to 3 and y is equal to 2. Okay, we need to invert that number for that -3 there, because we're kind of compensating for the fact that we know that we don't want our denominator to be 0. So the thing that x cannot be is 3, because if we have 3 there, we're going to get 3 minus 3, which is going to give us 0. And that's why our x asymptote is actually 3 and not -3 like we see in this question. The +2, on the other hand, just moves our graph up and down, so it doesn't really matter. We're going to leave it as positive. All right, let's write down the domain of f. I know that there are two different ways to write this. You can either write this in set builder notation, you can write it in interval notation. I will give you both, and then we will have a look at that. So we know that the domain of F is the X values. So I know that my X values will be an element of all real numbers, and this is if you're using set builder notation, but I know that X cannot equal 3. Okay. That is set builder notation. Now, if you're going to do interval notation, you're still going to have to tell us that X is an element of, and then I'm going to open round brackets, negative infinity, all the way up to 3. And then I cannot include 3 because 3 is an asymptote. So round brackets again, this union with round brackets 3, and that will go all the way to infinity. Okay, and that's the answer we'd get there. You can pick one of each. Luzuko says, ma'am, is 5.1, is it incorrect to use P and Q? Unfortunately, yes, Luzuko. You do need to follow the instruction exactly explicitly, and they want the equation. Now, if we look at our Cartesian plane, let me grab a quick Cartesian plane here. Okay, if we go back to grade 9 functions where we drew straight lines, we know for a fact that the asymptote of X is a straight vertical line. Now, they want the equation of this line, and unfortunately, it's not going to include P or Q. This line, the equation of the line itself is X is equal to 3. So we do need to express it exactly the way that they want us to express it. That would be y is equal to 2, because according to the equation of a straight line, this is the equation. This is the equation that they're looking for. Okay, so be very careful. You must express it in X and Y. All right. Okay. All right. Determine the coordinates of the x-intercept of F. No problem at all. You're very welcome. Okay, so we know that the x-intercept is where y is equal to 0. So I'm just going to write it on the side over here. I'm going to make my f of x equal to 0. 0 is equal to -1 over x minus 3 plus 2. And then I'm going to take my positive 2 over to the other side. I'm going to get -2 is equal to -1 over x minus 3. And then I want that x minus 3 out of the denominator. So I'm going to multiply both sides by x minus 3. And multiply the side by x minus 3 as well. Or you can say cross multiply. That works as well. Those two will cancel. So I'm going to have -2 distributed into this bracket. I will get -2x plus 6 is equal to -1. I will move the -6 over to the other, positive 6 over to the other side, and it will become -6. So I will have -2x is equal to -7, and therefore my x is equal to 7 over 2. Please don't be afraid of fractions, guys. Okay, especially if the question, you know that you've done the process correctly. Okay. Please make sure that you're not afraid of fractions. So when you see the answer 7 over 2, x is equal to 7 over 2, but they want the coordinates. So I need to write it as a coordinate, my apologies. Okay, so it's going to be 7 over 2 and 0. If you've done the process right, don't think that your answer needs to be a whole number. Half the time, they don't do that. You need to know how to do the processes. Okay, I've got a question here. It says, Mem, when do we use this bracket instead of this one for our domain? Okay, I'll show you now. Let's take the example of, let's say, for instance, a parabola, right? If we look at the difference between a parabola and a hyperbola, if I draw one over here, parabola only has a turning point. Now, if I had to find the domain or the range, let's say, for instance, for this parabola over here, we're looking for the range. I know that my y, if this coordinate over here is 1 and -2, I know that my y needs to be greater than or equal to -2, because there isn't like a gaping hole here. It's included. We need to include that turning point over there. So if we're going to include that part where the graph turns, then we have to use square brackets. So in this case, we would say y is an element of square brackets -2 all the way to infinity. Now, the issue with our hyperbola is that it's not allowed to touch the point 3. It's not allowed to touch, and I've completely drawn this on the wrong side. This should be over here. It should be over here and not on this side. Okay, so the graph is not allowed to touch the point 3. So it can get as close as possible to 3, but it won't touch it. And that's when we use the square brackets. If this line was just there and the graph could actually touch the line, but it couldn't go over it, then we would use square brackets to show that 3 is also included. But in this case, because it's not, we draw round brackets instead of square. I hope that answered your question, Masudi. Okay, let me know if it did. If it didn't, I'm happy to explain again. All right, okay, now the coordinates of the y-intercept. You're very welcome. All right, the coordinates of the y-intercept, we're going to make x equal to 0. So y is equal to -1 over 0 plus, and I'm saying plus, 0 minus 3, minus 3 plus 2. We're going to get a fraction here. A negative and a negative will give me a positive. So I've got 1 over 3 plus 2, which should give us 7 over 3. I'm hoping I'm correct. That would be 6 plus 1 is 7 over 3. Okay, so our y coordinates would be 0 and 7 over 3. Okay, now it says here, draw a graph of f. Okay, I'm going to do a very rough sketch. And yeah, I'll tell you guys, my grade 10s, they make fun of my drawing all the time. They say I should really go for lessons. So please excuse me if my drawing isn't up to par. Okay, but I'll tell you guys all the important things will be there. Now, just note over here, guys, that they want you to mark all the asymptotes. So you must show them all the asymptotes. No, not at all. Also, they'll give you your marks. Okay, they'll give you your marks in that case. All right. Okay, we need to show all the asymptotes and all the intercepts. Okay, so I'm going to start with my x is equal to 3. Now, when I was in matric, I had a very, very strict math teacher. Okay, I had a very strict math teacher who refused for us to leave anything out. He refused. So he would make us name this part. Y is equal to 2, that part x is equal to 3, and then we would go to where they cross over there and we would write 3 and 0. And we would go over here, write 0 and 2. We would even name this point of intersection because it's very important. It helps us find our axes of symmetry when we have to find the two values for the axes of symmetry. So this coordinate over here is 3 and 2. Okay, my x-intercept is 7 over 2. If I'm not mistaken, 7 over 2 is like 3.5. Correct? Yeah, 3.5. So it should be a little bit on this side. There's our x-intercept, and our y-intercept 7 over 3, that should be 2 and a third, which should be right above on that side over there, 2 and a third. And then you can draw your graphs like that. Okay. All right. Now, I want you guys to note that even though you've done all of this work, this question is only worth 3 marks. It's worth 3 marks because this is actually grade 11 work. So they're not really going to rate it that highly because we should be able to do it regardless of that. Okay, let's look at mark allocation quickly. And you guys can tell me how much you've gotten out of 10. Okay, first mark allocation. Let me just remove this over here so we can see our answers. Okay, first mark allocation will be for that equation and that equation. You must give them both. If you wrote the interval notation here, you're going to get 1 mark for saying that. And Dokoza is asking, if we don't write the squiggly brackets, if we leave that part out, will they still mark it? Yes, they will. Don't stress. So you get 1 mark for that or 1 mark for that, either one of those. All right, for finding the x-intercept, making the y-intercept 0 like we did here, and solving for it will give you 1 mark. For getting to the answer 7 over 2, they will give you 1 mark, and then they'll give you another mark for writing it as a coordinate. Okay, same with solving for the y-intercept. They're going to give you 1 mark for the working out. That's a method mark, and 1 mark for the coordinate itself. That's an accuracy mark. In your drawing over here, you're going to get 1 mark for each of your asymptotes, or both of your asymptotes together will give you 1 mark for drawing your graphs in the right place, in the correct place, and also for naming your intercepts And for indicating where your X and Y intercept are, that was also 1 mark. All right, I'm going to ask you guys a favor. If you can just pop how much you've gotten out of 10 in the chat for me, just so we see where we are kind of with section A type questions. And you see, it's like, it's already feeling nice. You know, hey, teacher Yules, I'm just like, you walk into the exam and you're already like, I got this, I can do it. I am
exactly
100% on the money. Yeah, we got this.
Yeah.
100%.
Nice, guys. Wow, they're getting such good marks. Well done.
Excellent, excellent. For those of you who got 8 and 9, I'm hoping we know where we lost that 1 mark. I see somebody saying here, I forgot to write the restriction. And that's very important. Like, I cannot stress enough how pedantic we need to be. Okay, we know what pedantic means. It means be nitpicky, almost be OCD about everything. Sometimes hoy in things that they didn't even ask for. Okay, just tell them that even if you can, just write on your paper. Question 5, this is a hyperbola. You guys, when people see your paper and they know that you understand what you're doing, they're not going to mark as, like, sometimes, guys, after I tell you at marking, after paper number 276,000, I'm not going to be gracious if you're not very detailed about what it is that we're doing. Okay, that's okay, Shri. I'm hoping I'm saying this correct. Is it Shriyaba? Did I say that correctly, or is it Shriya? I think it's Shreya. I'm sorry, please do correct me. I don't want to get your name wrong.
You
Okay.
are better than I am. They've been called worse, so don't worry.
Because I've now, if I've butchered your name, that was definitely not my intention. But
you got it correctly. She's saying yes.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, Shreya, so we're going to do another question. Okay, excellent. Another question where we look at the domain and range as well, and you probably we'll talk about it as we get to that part. All right, let's move to the next section. Yes, absolutely. Here is your next challenge. Nhlanhla, let's see if you guys can do question 6. Okay, just need to move this stuff out of the way. Give me a second. Let's move that out of the way. Remove all of that stuff. That is analytical geometry. We don't need that. Okay, I'm going to give you guys this question here. Okay, just need to put it on the screen properly. It's only worth 8 marks. Okay, and if you 100% know what you're doing, you should be able to finish this section in 6 minutes. Because technically the way we work is if a section is worth 8 marks, you should be able to do it in 8 minutes, a mark a minute. But in this case, if you know what you're doing, you should get it done in about 6 minutes. So I'm going to give you guys about 6 minutes. If you don't finish, that's perfectly fine. We can continue from there. But guys, go for it. Once you're done, guys, pick another emoji. Keep the creativity coming with those emojis when you're done. All right, go for it, guys. Right. In fact, I'm going to ask you once we're done here if you felt like this was a bit of a more challenging question. If not, we'll look for a one that's a little bit harder for you. Sure, beautiful, Fato. Thank you, Tristan. Thanks, Cheslin. We'll just wait for everybody else. They've got 2 minutes left. Nice emoji, Khalifa. I like it. Hi, Beyonce. Love that. Beyonce Williams. I'm in love with your name. All right, that's time. Sure, I feel like I maybe might need to look for more difficult questions because you guys are really just like flying through these, which is amazing because most of you guys finished in about 4 to 5 minutes, 8 questions. You're already saving enough questions for those really tough questions at the very end. So that's really good. All right, let's start from the beginning. 6.1 says calculate the value of K. So if we look at K over here, we know that K is our X value and 2 is our Y value. So we're just going to go into the formula that they've given us over here, and we're going to substitute each of those into the formula. So my f of x is 2. I will go 2 is equal to log base 4 of k. Now, the way I'm going to solve for k, I don't know how you guys would do this. I would take it out of log form and put it back into exponential form because it makes it easier for me to see. I know that this is my base, this is my exponent, that must be my answer. So I should have 4 squared is equal to k, therefore k is equal to 16. That's the answer we should get here. All right. Right, 1 mark for k substitution, last mark for the final answer. All right, okay, determine which values of x, the values of x for which f of x is defined between -1 and -2, in between -1 and 2. All right, so we're looking for the y values where our graph is going to be defined. So what I normally do, because they ask us for the f of x, I normally replace this value over here with a y. Okay, so I know that they want the X values from the Y perspective. So where does that go in terms of my Y? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the Y value where 2 is, right? And I'm going to, okay, I know that that is where 2 is, and I'm going to match that with my X value over here. We know that the X value over there is 16. Now, if I had to go to the -1 part of it down here, at the bottom over here, okay, I need to find -1 over there. Sorry, excuse me, I need to find -1, and I need to then look at where that's actually going to be on my graph if I draw it that way. Okay, so we still need to solve for where X is going to be when our Y is -1, because they haven't given us that part. We're looking for that value for X right there, that one that's going to touch our graph over there from -1. So we know that our Y value that they've given us is -1. We're just going to pop it back into the formula. -1 is equal to log of 4x, because that's what we're trying to solve for. So I know if I take this out of log form, I'm going to get 4 to the power of -1 is equal to x. Therefore, x at that point is equal to 1/4. Right? So I know that on the -1 side of my Y value, there is 1/4. And on the 2 side of that value is 16. So I know that my X then will go in the middle. And because they're including these 2 values, I will also include them in my answer. Okay. Let me just write that a little bit better. 1/4. Okay, I'm just going to point out, guys, when we're working with logs, you should not get negative answers. So if one of your X values came out with a negative answer, it's not going to work. Okay, so I can explain again, no problem, Mamello. Just note here, okay. Okay, I see, Lebogang. We'll see if we can find another one of those and see if we can do it. Or I'll tell Teacher Lee and she'll find you one of those. All right, Mamello, I hope you agree with me that this f of x stands for my y values. Okay, f of x is y. In my function, f of x is y. So when they ask me for the x values that correspond with each of these y's, it's pertaining to the actual function that they've given us. So what I then need to do is I need to go look at the point 2. I'm going to go look at the point 2. Now, this is the y value. I'm going to go ask myself, at that y value 2, what is my x value? Because they want the x value. And I've just worked that one out in the question before. I know that at the y value 2, my x is 16. Right. Now, they also tell me that this interval over here will end at -1. So I need to go figure out if my y is -1, what is my x value going to be at -1? I've got the function, so I'm just going to go there and I'm going to replace my y with -1 and solve for x. Okay, and when I solve for x, I find that x is equal to 1/4. So my interval in y will correspond to my interval in x between 1/4 and 16. Okay, Mamello, please let me know if that makes sense. Okay. If not, then I'm going to give everybody else a question and then you and I can have another conversation. All right. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the inverse quickly. Okay. It says right here. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mamello. Okay. It says here, write down the equation of f to the, I know we shouldn't say f to the -1, but it's such a habit, f to the -1, the inverse of f in the form of y is equal to something. So we're going to take our log function up top there. Okay, f of x is equal to log base 4 of x, and we're just going to change that f of x to a y. So we're going to write it as y is equal to. Then we're going to swap the x and the y around. So I'm going to have x is equal to log base 4 of y, and then I'm just going to rearrange again to make y the subject of the formula. So I know that this, again, I'm going to take it out of log form back into exponential. So y must be equal to 4, base 4 with an exponent of x. Okay. All right. Then the last one over here, they say, for which values of x will x multiplied by the inverse of x be less than 0? Now, this question is quite, okay, the way they phrased it makes it sound very, very difficult to look at, but it's not. Okay, what I normally do here is I'm going to go look for I'm going to look for the actual graph that they're asking us for. They want us to look for the graph of or the graph of the inverse, right? Now, if I take my Cartesian plane over here and I sketch the graph of my inverse, right? I know that it's an exponential graph, so it's going to come with an asymptote. Now, I know that the asymptote of this log graph was the y-axis. Now, because when you do the inverse, everything becomes opposite. X becomes y, y becomes x. I know that for my exponential graph, my x-axis is going to be my asymptote. My x-axis is going to be my asymptote. So I'm then going to draw my graph in that direction. So it should go up in that direction. Okay. That's where my graph should go. Now, they want us to look at all the values for x multiplied by the inverse that are going to give us less than 0. Now, this multiply, I know it's really tiny, but we need to consider it. That multiply over there is very important. Okay, so what they're actually telling us when they say that this thing needs to be less than 0 is they want us to find a product that is going to give us minus, a product that's going to give us minus. And what this means is, if I have to multiply these two functions, they must give me a minus. I have two options for this. I'm either going to have the positive part of my inverse graph multiplied by my negative x values on the x-axis. So all of these negative values multiplied by the positive of this graph, or I'm going to take the negative of my inverse graph multiplied by all the positive values going in that direction of my graph. Okay, so I need to see where they are together and what values they're possibly going to give us, right? Now, if I look at, let's look at the positive one. If we look at x, where x has positive values, if we look at this side over here, my x has all positive values, but my inverse graph also has all positive values. So the product of those two is going to give me positive answers. So this part of my graph is out. It cannot be this side of my graph. We're not going to include this side of my graph. The other part over here is where my inverse graph is positive, which is still up here, but my x values are negative, which would be these. Okay, now I know that all of these values for my x are negative, but my graph has an asymptote at 0, so it's always going to be positive on this side. And a positive up here and a negative over there is going to give us the negative that they want. So the x values we're actually looking for, we can say that x needs to be less than 0. I want you guys to give me a thumbs up in the chat if you understand what I've just explained. Give me a thumbs down if you're still a little confused. I'm happy to explain it again. Okay. Beautiful stuff. Amazing. Okay, well done. All right, so whenever they give you one of these where you multiply, one of these where it's something times something, we need to consider what this is. Okay, Nonjabulo, if you want to type in the chat where it is I've lost you, I'm happy to explain again. All right, if they say here, something times something equals negative, in your mind you must say, what do I need to multiply with what to get negative? A positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive. Then you go look at the figures that they've given you, and you go find where the two of them together will give you the thing that you want. Okay. For those of you who are still confused, I'm quickly going to put another question. I'm quickly going to put another question in the chat. Ntata says, isn't the inverse a y value? No, my sweetie, it's a function. Okay, remember this over here, that is our graph. Okay, so the inverse over here, y is equal to 4 of x, that's the inverse graph. The inverse of x is equal to 4 to the power of x. Okay, so it's an actual graph. It's the graph I've drawn here in yellow, that one. Okay, 4 to the power of x. No, so somebody's asking, if I wrote x as an element of negative infinity all the way to 0, round brackets, That's 100% correct as well. You can write x is an element of round brackets, negative infinity, semicolon 0, round brackets. That's your mark as well. Okay, all right. I'm going to put another question on the screen for those of you. Oh, I forgot to do the mark allocation. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so we've got the mark allocation for that one. For this next question, for 6.2, they're going to give you a mark for finding the value of x at -1. They're going to give you a mark for that, and then they're going to give you a mark for the inequality at the end. In this one over here, they're going to give you a mark for switching your x and y around. Then they're going to give you a mark for your final answer. That'll give you that 2. So for switching your values around and 2. And for this one, they're going to give you both marks for finding that out. You can do it by inspection. You can actually look at it and do it by inspection. They're going to give you both marks for that answer that you've given them. For those of you, if you've used interval notation, they'll also give you 2 marks for that. Okay, pop your answer out of 8. Let me know how much you got out of 8. And then we can continue. I'm going to put up another question. Excuse me, and then I'm going to explain the other question to everyone else. Well done, guys. Okay, for those of you who got 6, is it the last question? Is it 6.4? Because I feel like we might need to look at 6.4 again. Okay, I'm going to take this question, put it over here. Yes, the last one. Oh, 6.2. Okay, the values of x. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Gugu, if you're struggling with this, please let me know if you're understanding where we're coming from with that question now. Okay. Right, I'm just going to erase this. Okay. Okay, beautiful. All right. For those of you who are okay about how I explained question 6.4, I'm going to ask you guys to quickly look at question 7. The rest of you guys, I'm going to keep explaining this. So if you're working on question 7, sure, I'm going to run out of space here. If you're working on question 7, please mute me. Okay, please mute me and then finish the question. Then you can unmute me once you're done, because I'm then going to be all up in your business trying to explain that last question again. Okay. So for those of you who are still not with me on 6.4, let's look at this again. Okay, so the question says, I'm just going to replicate the question because I can't move over now. Okay, can't move over to the other side. The question says, for which values of x is x multiplied by the inverse of x less than 0. Now, if you're following with me, please just interact with me in the chat for just 2 seconds. Okay, I just want to make sure that you guys are following me as, okay. Can you not see the questions? Oh, I've only given you the thing. I'm sorry. Let me give you guys the questions. Where are they? There they are. I've left them down here. How do I do this? Ooh, Teacher Yolanda, how does Teacher Lee do this? This is a lot. Okay, is this fine? Can I show you guys the questions down here? Is that fine?
Yes, as long as we can still see the whole
drawing.
The drawing, because I mean we need to read from the drawing.
Yeah, that's the problem. Okay. All right, I'm going to replicate that other question down here. Let me make this smaller. I'm pretty sure it won't be a big deal if it's a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
Okay. Those of you doing this question, please do let me know if you can see everything. I just want to make sure if you guys can see the questions and the drawing. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you can.
Now it looks better.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah, because now we can see the picture and the questions.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, excellent. All right, I want you guys to continue there. For those of you still following along with me, right, where's our question now? I'm going to have to rewrite the question. Okay. Okay. All right, if you can see the questions, go ahead and mute me. For those of you who are still confused, let's talk about this. I'm going to just rewrite the question. For which values of x is x multiplied by the inverse of x less than 0. Okay, if you're following with me with this question, I'm just going to ask some base questions. I want you guys to stick with me. Okay, all right. Are you guys in agreement that less than 0 means negative? Okay, just type yes in the chat if you're following with me. Are we in agreement? Okay. Less than zero means negative. Excellent. So we have just figured out what the inverse of this graph is. We've just found the inverse. We know that the inverse is y is equal to 4 to the power of x. We found the inverse. Now, this x over here stands for all x values. All x values. So basically, it's going to be all the values along here. Okay, it's all the values along here. Now, if I had to sketch the graph of my inverse, y is equal to 4 to the power of x, I'm going to get an increasing exponential graph that goes that way. Okay, now let me ask you guys a question. What is the asymptote for this exponential graph? What is the asymptote? Correct, Teddy. Yes, 100%. It's 0. So my graph cannot touch there. Yes, yes, it's the x-axis. So I know that my exponential graph cannot touch there. Now, because we are multiplying, remember I spoke about that little dot in the middle right there, right? This dot over here. That means we're going to multiply. Now, if I had to multiply anything to get negative, if I want a negative, I need something multiplied by something equals a negative number. I know for a fact that both of these numbers cannot be the same. One of them has to be positive and the other one has to be negative. Now, if we look at the way this is positioned, x comes first. So I either need positive x values and negative values for my exponential, or I can do it in the opposite direction. I can have negative x values multiplied by positive values for my exponential, and that will also give me negative. Give me a yes in the chat if what I've just explained makes sense. Okay, excellent. Okay, so what we now want to find is we want to find parts of our graph where the inverse is, the x values are positive and my exponential graph is negative, or I want to find a part of my graph where my x values are negative and my exponential graph is positive. Okay, let's start with this first option up here. Let's start with where my x values are positive. Now, all my x values are positive over here, right? All of these are positive, but my exponential on this side is also positive. And a positive is not going to give me the answer I want. So that combination is not going to work, right? That combination is not going to work. Now, let's look at the other sides. Isn't x for the original graph? No. And if this x over here, if they wanted us to use the original graph, then they would have said f of x. But they didn't say f of x. F of x is the graph. X is just all the x values. Okay, let me know if you're understanding the difference that I'm showing you there. Okay, let me know if I'm making sense. All right. Okay, so we know that this option isn't going to work. Now we're going to go look at the option at the bottom. Now I want negative x values and positive values for my exponential graph. So if I go to my negative x values over here, that's negative. And what do we know about my exponential graph over here? It's positive, and it's never going to become negative because it has an asymptote at the x-axis. It's never going to become negative. It's always going to be positive. So which x values are we going to look at to find that negative that we want? Everything from where x is less than 0. So the answer we're looking for is where x is less than 0. Okay, give me a thumbs up for those of you who are following along. Give me a thumbs up if what I've just explained makes sense to you. Beautiful, Kalipa. Well done. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody else is on the same page with me. Thanks, Emiche. Excellent. All right, so we are just looking at where the two things are going to give us what we want. Okay, so in a test or if in your final exam, if they ask you for two things that are going to give you a number that's greater than 0. Okay, if they ask you for something greater than 0, what are my two options? Who can give us an idea? What are the two options that we're going to look for? If we're looking for something greater than 0, we know that this is positive, right? We know that it's positive. So we know that the answer we want is going to be positive. What are our two possible options if we want it to be positive? Does anybody have an idea? We'd look for where both our graphs are what? What values? Correct, exactly, Kalipa. We're going to look for a place where our graph is positive and our other graph is also positive, or the other values, correct, Tristan, or where we're going to get negative and negative, because both of these things are going to give us the positive that we want. So we're just going to go evaluate our graph, see where the negative and the negatives are, and see if they actually give us a positive result. And then we're going to go look where the positive and the positive are and see if they give us a positive result. Okay, I hope that helped. All right, and I'm guaranteeing you now, I haven't seen your paper, but I have a feeling a question like this is gonna come out because it's been coming out since I was in matric, and that was a while ago. So you guys can imagine, it was years and years ago when the dinosaurs still roamed the earth. Okay, all right. Whenever you're ready, I'm gonna ask you guys to continue with question 7, okay? And try and answer the questions that they've given you over there. It's a bit of a mixture of functions and analytical geometry. When you're done, again, pop your favorite emoji in the chat. Okay.
Coco, will it be fine with you for me to run the poll at 5-2, but then still you can still stay with them like this? I can jump to the other class.
I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I'll just have to take a screenshot of it for you. Is that what I need to do, or will you take the screenshot before you leave?
No, before I leave, I'll take the screenshot. Everyone would have done the poll. Then they will just continue with you whenever you're done, but then I'll go and start the other class.
No worries at all. Okay, that's perfectly fine. I'm happy with that. I'll write it down on the screen for you quickly. Well, depending on what they've given you for the turning point, you can, if you FOIL that out, you can use x is equal to negative b over 2a. Okay, that will give you the x value, and whatever x value you get, you can put it back into the formula. Or, Cameron, if you're lazy, you are allowed to do it by inspection, and you can find the equation of the axis of symmetry and use that as your x value. Yes, Anami, I will let you know before we leave. Okay. Thank you, teacher Yolanda. I think once you guys have answered the pace poll for teacher Yolanda really quickly, I will continue with the answers that we get, okay? So if you guys can just answer the poll for her quickly, and then we can continue. All right, okay, we've got about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try my best to rush through this. And let's see if we can get the correct answers that we're looking for. All right, so best thing to always do, guys, rule number one, step number one, without a doubt, is you're always going to read this write-up. This write-up that they give you over here is in B. Yeah, yes, I'll give you that explanation just now, Amkelani. All right, so sometimes what happens is they will write things over here that they do not give you in the drawing itself. And then you end up putting your hand being like, oh, ma'am, I think this question is wrong. No, it's not. We need to read everything over here and make sure that what they've put over there is also part of the question itself. All right, so we'll find here that the graph of f of x is x plus 4 and x minus 2. What do we know about these two values? These are our x-intercepts. Just the inverse numbers of that. So I know that my parabola is going to cross my graph here, B at -4 and at D at 6, right? That's one thing we know for sure. That's something that they haven't put on the drawing for you, so we need to know that. Okay, it says the parabola cuts the x-axis at B and D and the y-axis at G. All right, so that also tells us a lot, because if it cuts the y-axis, we know that this is the y-intercept where x is equal to 0. We can find that if we FOIL that out. Right, C is the turning point of F. Line AE has an angle of inclination, theta, and cuts the x-axis and y-axis at A and E. Right, line AE is a straight line, so we already know that the equation of that is going to be y is equal to mx plus c. At some point, we might need to find a gradient for that line. Before we even get into the questions, we already know that. Okay, T is a point on F between B and G. Now, normally, we would expect something like this to be a point of intersection. But if they're just giving you a random point somewhere with nothing to be done there, chances are, very likely, they're going to ask you to derive something. They're going to ask you to differentiate some way. So be careful of that. There might come a point where you have to do something of that sort. All right, so it says here, write down the coordinates of B and D. I've already beat them to it. I can do that. The coordinates just -4 and 0. That's B, and D is 6 and 0. So the more we interpret, the easier it is to find the answers that we're looking for. Now it says calculate the coordinates of C. Now, if you're lazy like me, I'm going to count how many values there are in between here and there. I know that between -4 and 10, there are 10 units. -4 and 6, there are 10 units. So my halfway mark is going to be at the 5-unit mark. From -4 plus 5, it's going to give me 1. So I already know that my x value is 1. I'm just going to take 1 and put it back into the formula. So I'm going to go f of 1 is equal to 1 plus 4 multiplied by 1 minus 6. 1 plus 4 is 5. 1 minus 6 is -5. So the value I'm looking for is -25 for my y. So my coordinates of C over here are going to be 1 and -25. All right. Write down the range of F. I remember one of you guys asking me about the question on domain and range. Now, because this is a parabola, we cannot exclude the turning point. The turning point is part of the graph. So when we write interval notation, we're going to include the square brackets. So I can write it this way. Squiggly brackets, y is an element of real numbers, where y is greater than or equal to negative 25. The turning point, the y value of my turning point is going to do that for me. Okay, or I can write y is an element of, I know that it's going up, so my smallest number is going to be negative 25, but I'm including negative 25. So square brackets, negative 25, all the way to infinity. Infinity always has round brackets. Okay, now it says here, we're given that theta is 14.04 degrees, and the tangent to f at t is perpendicular. Now, we already know this word tangent tells us that the graphs together, or the line that we draw, the tangent at t is going to cross just once, like, yeah, just like that. It's going to touch it once. Right, the tangent at t is perpendicular to AE. So if we want to find the equation of this graph, we're going to have to find the gradient of the other graph in order to find the gradient of that graph. Now, we know the formula for the gradient when we've been given an angle of inclination. Gradient is equal to tan of theta. Now, they've given me the theta part, so I'm just going to put this into a calculator and it's going to give me my degrees. Okay, so I'm going to go, the gradient is going to equal to the tan of 14.04 degrees, and the answer I should get out is something close to 1 over 4, 0.25 or 1 over 4. And I know that the gradient of AE, the line AE, is 1 over 4. All right, and unfortunately, that's where I'm going to have to stop for today, guys. I'm already 1 minute over and I have to run to the other class. Okay, Gelani, I hope that explained your question. In this particular case, I hope it helped. That's it from me, guys. Teacher Lee will be back on Thursday to continue with you guys on the next section, but thank you so much, guys, for joining me. It was really fun to hang out with you guys and get some matric maths in. Okay, and Amathe says the answer for 7.4.2 is -2 and -12. I can tell you now. No, my sweetie, you need to check again. It should be -1 and -21. So double check again, my sweetie, and let me know. Okay.